Creepy things happen before the graves.
Have you ever wondered what's inside a mausoleum? By Peck. I squinted as the last rays of the Friday evening sun ducked under the horizon across the vast fields of the property. It glinted off of every drop of sprinkler water that adorned the freshly cut blades of grass. I closed my eyes and breathed in the fresh air. Time to clock in. Most people would think that the night shift at a cemetery is creepy or frightening, but to me, it was the most natural thing in the world. Don't get me wrong, I love my day job, but the night was so invigorating. It was a bit of a trek to get all the way across the many acres of land, so I took my truck. I enjoyed the scenery, especially the oldest part of the cemetery closer to the edge of the property, where I'd spent most of the last night too. The older monuments towered regally above graves that hadn't been visited by family or a friend for decades. Mausoleums stood protectively in eternal chambers of rest. It was these that I was particularly fond of. They gave the dead a decorative home to sleep in above the ground instead of burying them deep in foreign territory. Unfortunately, entombment, choosing a mausoleum as opposed to a burial or cremation, has become less popular over the years as cremation is on the rise. I and the daytime groundskeeper were the only ones who had access to the keys for the mausoleums on our property, but sadly, almost nobody ever came to visit graves from the era when mausoleums were popular, and if they did, they were too afraid to actually enter the small structure. People always seemed to be afraid of the dead, but I wasn't. I believed in their goodwill and even considered them my friends, oddly enough. I suppose that's because I didn't really have any other real friends. At least no one was around to hear me when I talked to them. I figured that the older graves that no longer got visitors could use someone who cared, someone to remember them and perhaps have a little chat with. Not that they ever responded, until that Friday night. The sun had set by the time I reached the far side of the property, and I switched off the engine, climbing down out of the truck. As I shut the door, I tilted my head back to look up at the sky. It was starless tonight, but the moon was as full and bright as it had ever been. Clouds threatened to creep in and obstruct its lunar glow, but I took advantage of the moment before they could and basked in the moonlight. Then, cloudy shadows cloaked my face in darkness. As they passed and I opened my eyes, I felt my heart stop and I let out a guttural shout. Directly in front of me, and I'm talking centimeters away, was a silhouette of pure darkness, darker than the darkest night I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot of nights. I wanted to back away, but I was frozen in fear. Then, it opened its eyes. White, just pure white, empty, soulless white. A half gasp, half sob escaped from my throat. I felt a hollow sensation in my chest, as if my heart was suddenly empty and all the blood had been drained from every single vein and artery and capillary. It felt like my soul was being ripped apart the longer I stared. Somehow, I managed to tear my eyes away and felt warm tears fall down my cheeks as I did. I brought my hand up to wipe them away, but they were dark and thick. Blood. The silhouette began to emit breathing sounds, at first slow, even breaths, but then they grew too loud, heaving gasps that turned into a deafening full-on hyperventilation. Then it let out an ear-piercing shriek, a sound that resonated with the same horror and grief as a mother losing her only child. I yelped, finally gathering my senses and reeling backward. By the time I hit the ground, the silhouette had disappeared. I looked wildly around, but there was nobody else there. My chest was heaving in sync with my frightened panting. I went to wipe my eyes again, but the blood was gone. Slowly, I began to rise to my feet. What the hell just happened? What was that? Nobody else was supposed to be around at this time, so I had zero explanation for what had just happened to me. I was never one to believe in the supernatural, but dear Lord, did I believe tonight. My lip quivered as I rolled around and yanked frantically at the driver's side door handle. It was locked, and I could see my keys still in the ignition. My heart skipped a beat and I glanced around, ensuring that I was alone. Then, I darted around the back of the vehicle and crawled into the truck bed. The bed was full, but I managed to shimmy my way around the tarp that I had put there. I gripped my trusty, rusty shovel to the left of me. God, it stinks under here, I thought. I needed to wash it. My thoughts were interrupted by another fearsome shriek that sliced through the still night air. It was close. Then came another, further away this time. Was it moving away? No, there was more than one of them. The next shriek was even closer, right behind the truck. The faraway voice responded, and suddenly there was a chorus of blood-curdling screams loud enough to wake the dead. Suddenly, they stopped, and all sound cut out. No wind, no frogs, no crickets, nothing. My heart was racing, but I waited. Then I heard it, directly in my right ear. The breathing. Slow, raspy breaths. It progressed to a gulping of air as it began to pant and hyperventilate again. I was sure that it couldn't possibly breathe any faster, and then silence again. I held my breath. After several moments, I slowly released it. I staked my fingers up and around the top of the tarp, then slowly lowered it so that I could peek my eyes out. Again, no one was there. I sat there in stunned disbelief, not knowing what to do next. Hesitantly, I climbed out of the truck bed and recovered it with the tarp. On high alert, I shut the door and made my way back around to the driver's side. Once again, I tried the handle. This time, it opened easily on the first try. I leaped in and slammed the heavy door closed behind me. I reached for the keys in the ignition and turned them as hard as I could. The engine didn't start. It didn't even sputter. The truck didn't jump in the slightest. The more I tried, the more hopeless I felt. I yanked out the keys in frustration and threw them at the windshield. That's when I saw them. All of them. All of the shriekers emerged from the darkness, emitting their wails, no longer silhouettes, but women. Ghostly, pale, dead women with those piercingly white, demonic eyes. A dozen of them sprinting directly towards me. They were unnaturally fast, and the worst part was, I recognized every single one of them. I tried the ignition 3 more times before I realized that the best chance I had at survival was to fucking run. I grabbed the keys, jumped out of the driver's seat, and started sprinting back toward the main equipment shed at the front of the property. But when I looked back, I knew I wouldn't make it in time. They were significantly faster than me. Suddenly, I had an idea. I veered right toward one of the larger mausoleums in the old part of the cemetery and fumbled with my keys. God, there was so many fucking keys. Where was the master? Yes, there it was. I was lucky to find it so quickly. I inserted the key into the lock, and as quickly as I could with shaking hands as the screaming grew louder and closer. After what seemed like an eternity, the lock came loose and the chains fell to the ground easily. A great stench erupted from behind the marble doors of the tomb. I gagged, but stumbled in anyway, taking the chains and lock with me. Then I shut the door and went to wrap the chains as best as I could around what? Oh shit! There was nothing at all that I could use to chain the door shut. My eyes widened as I began to lose my composure, and I braced myself with my back against the doors and my legs against the stone bench across from me. The smell was pungent and overpowering, but it did not come from the person who had originally been entombed here. It was the same smell as the tarp in my truck bed, and it came from the 3 decomposing cadavers with caved-in skulls laid out on the bench in front of me. 3 cadavers of 3 of the women that were chasing me. The rest of the dozen I'd killed and hidden inside other mausoleums closer to the edge of the property. I never thought they would come back for me. At the same time, I knew that I couldn't have gotten away with this forever. I pulled my phone out of my pocket as the knocking and scraping started from outside of the tomb, the scraping of trusty, rusty shovels. And that's where I am now, typing out this last confession to you in hopes that maybe the truth can redeem my soul and stop these hungry ghosts. They've gotten more violent with their knocking and are banging their shovels on every surface of the mausoleum. I don't think I can hold the door much longer. My legs are growing weak. If this is goodbye, well, I lived my life to the fullest and fulfilled my greatest fantasies. I suppose dying satisfied is better than dying with unfinished business. All I can say is, I don't regret what I did for a second. Don't think that my confession means that I have any remorse for killing these women. If that means I deserve to die, so be it. Such is the circle of life. I just hope they can find another sucker to take the night shift.